Thanks for coming out to this event on campus. Laura will actually go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists. But OnCam, I'm the regional president of OnCam here, and we are very, very dedicated to serving the security needs of educational facilities in particular, which is why we put together this panel. So,
all right, so starting on your left, I think, is Jumbi Edelbram, who Jumbi currently serves as the regional president, Americas, for OnCam, and he just told you a little bit about the company. He is responsible for all sales, marketing, and business development activities in the Americas. Prior to OnCam, Jumbi served as director of business development for the security division of Samsung Techwin, where he was responsible for managing strategic alliances with technology partners, consultants, architects and engineers, and large national integrators. And previously, he was vice president of business development for Next Level Security Systems and as director of business development for Axis Communications. And that's Jumbi. And next to him is Brandon Reich. Brandon is the surveillance business leader at Pivot3, where he directs all product, go-to-market, and partnership strategies. Brandon came to Pivot3 in 2014 from Honeywell Security Group, where he led the product, marketing, and global strategy functions for the commercial and enterprise technology business unit. Prior to Honeywell, Brandon spent 10 years leading a security consulting and engineering firm focused on large enterprise, institutional, and critical infrastructure engagements. And in 2016, Brandon was named one of the top 12 influencers in the physical security and video surveillance industry by Security World. Welcome, Brandon. And back in the middle, we have Paul Tim. Paul Tim, physical security professional credential. And Paul is vice president of Facility Engineering Associates, is a board certified physical security professional, the author of School Security, How to Build and Strengthen a School Safety Program, and a nationally acclaimed expert in school security. In addition to conducting numerous vulnerability assessments and his frequent keynote addresses, Paul is an experienced school crisis assistance team volunteer through the National Organization for Victims Assistance, NOVA. He is a member of ASIS International's School Safety and Security Council and the Illinois Association of School Business Officials Risk Management Committee. Welcome, Paul. And next to Paul right here is Joe Souza, correct? Got that right? So Joe is credentialed as certified protection professional, physical security professional, and certified business continuity planner. Joe is assistant director of security at the University of Central Florida, Department of Security and Emergency Management. He is responsible for the physical security of UCF, which we'll call it from now on, University of Central Florida, UCF campuses, and that includes more than 2,200 security cameras, more than 1,200 card readers, managing a contract security guard force, and creating security policies, procedures, and standards. He's also responsible for the approvals for the use of drones on campuses. That's got to be pretty interesting. And he's a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and obtained his undergraduate and MBA degrees from Daniel Webster College in Nashua, New Hampshire. Joe is board certified by the American Society for Industrial Security and the Disaster Recovery Institute International. And next to me is Jeff Morgan, also from University of Central Florida. Jeff is Director of Security and Emergency Management. He is responsible for emergency management, security management, and homeland security for UCF. He's also responsible for the Emergency Operations Center and other key assets that UCF utilizes in the event of emergencies, disasters, or security incidents. Prior to working at UCF, Jeff served in the U.S. Air Force as a security forces officer responsible for nuclear security, anti-terrorism, and force protection. He holds a bachelor's degree in professional aeronautics from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a master's degree in homeland security from American Military University. Welcome all of our panelists. And we're going to start the questions by learning more about the University of Central Florida. And we'll start with you, Jeff. So as a little background, UCF is one of the largest universities in the country with more than 75,000 faculty, staff, and students. Jeff, how is UCF security and emergency management structured, and what are your strategies for handling threats?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank OnCam for hosting this panel, because I think we all can agree that unfortunately, universities and institutions of higher education, as well as K through 12, have to be prepared for crisis incidents on their campuses. So what I'll do is I'll start off with a little journey for UCF and how we got where we're at today. And it began about 9 years ago when they hired me as their first dedicated emergency manager for UCF. I was fortunate enough to get a Department of Education grant for about $500,000. At that point, I was able to hire a plans and programs coordinator because the university lacked a lot of plans. And we really didn't have much of a program as far as outreach materials and outreach capabilities with our faculty and staff and our students on emergency preparedness and also security matters as well. So naturally, the third person I hired was going to be our training and exercise coordinator because that was very important. Once we wrote our plans and we had the programs in place, we wanted to be able to train that and exercise that. And that was very pivotal for us at the university because at that point, when we went through the exercises with our executives, that's when they realized the importance of security and emergency management for UCF. During that process, our university police department received funding to build their new public safety building that they are currently using today. And I was able to inherit their old building that they had to become our dedicated emergency operations center for UCF. So keep in mind, at that point, there was only 3 of us moving into a facility that was about 7,500 square feet, and a lot of folks on campus didn't really support that as well. But because of our exercises, our executive policy group understood the importance of having a dedicated space for us to be able to respond and recover from any type of disaster or emergency. As soon as we moved into the EOC, about 2 months later, we had what we called a Tower 1 incident at UCF. The Tower 1 incident for us was a potential active shooter at the University of Central Florida. So UCF has 4 towers on our campus, and each one of these towers houses over 550 students. These are dormitories. This individual's plan was to pull the fire alarm and have his peers evacuate the building, and while they were doing that, he was going to actively shoot them and go through the process. And he also had IEDs that he was going to utilize to be able to throw into the crowds of people that was vacating the building and those type of things. When his roommates came out, of course, that was the first group of people that he saw. He raised his rifle and he pulled a trigger and it jammed on him. The roommate that was the first one that it was aimed at ran back into his room, locked his doors. He was also a military veteran. He called 911. Of course, at that point, our university police was already responding because of a fire alarm. And then now they knew that they had to go tactically because there was someone with a rifle inside the building. This individual then went back into his room and locked himself into his room, was trying to unjam the weapon. And during that process, what he had done before that, leading up to this attack, this planned attack, was he was communicating with another individual that was in prison already for killing his family and then going to his local high school to try and do the same exact thing. And one of the recommendations that this individual gave our shooter was to have 2 weapons. One to shoot the individuals in the building, and another one to take his own life if he had to. So that way, if he ran out of ammo, he had something to take his own life with. As soon as he heard the police department getting close to the building, onto the 3rd floor where he was at, he took his own life. Of course, our police officers didn't know that at the time. So if you go today on YouTube and you look at videos, our police chief was very innovative. We were one of the early adapters of the body cams for our police officers. And you'll see today on YouTube video one of our officers using keys, that's just like a janitor keys ring, trying to get into this room. And as a prior military person, prior security forces individual, law enforcement, I know that there's not much between that door and those officers losing their life if this individual didn't take his earlier on. So those were one of the things that we had to deal with. And the other incident we had to deal with was it took us over 4 hours for the chief and I to find someone that can give us access to the DVR for the cameras in that tower, because we didn't know whether or not that individual was working alone or with somebody else, and we needed that information, that critical information, very quickly. So sure enough, as soon as Tower 1 kind of wrapped up, it was several weeks of issues, we were able to hire on 2 additional emergency management staff, one for warning and communications to make sure that our alerting system is always working. Because that was something that was also a dual responsibility for myself. And as we kind of grew as a staff and the university grew with the different campuses and more buildings, we needed to make sure that someone was paying attention to those for us. The second individual we hired was a person for logistics and budget and finance for us, because as you can imagine, any situation like that costs a lot of money, and it comes out of the funding from a lot of different department operations funding, and it's not really fair to the departments that are responding to that to have an impact on their budget. So what the university has done is set aside contingency funds that we have now for any type of disaster emergency that we can start hitting right away. And this way the chief and I aren't asking for permission, we're just starting to spend money as we need to for that particular response. And then one of the biggest hires that we've done that's been very, very beneficial to the university is hired someone like Joe Souza, a security manager, someone that does this for a living. Because as you may know, most universities and K-12 schools are utilizing IT and other professionals to manage camera systems and access control, and they're usually disparate. And we had the same situation at our university. And the chief and I both knew that there's a career field called security management where people do this for a living. So we were able to convince our executive policy group to say, hey, you know what, we need to hire a security manager dedicated just to do this and get us back to where we have so we don't have the same situations that we had when we had Tower 1. So Joe has a tall order in front of him. He's been doing this for the last 2.5 years, and he's done a very great job for the university. And I'm excited that he's going to be able to share that story with you all. Since then, he's been able to hire an individual just dedicated for cameras and another person dedicated for access control. And at that point, we're also at the point now, for next fiscal year, looking to expand his office to be able to provide additional support, because we're attending every construction meeting, every business meeting, anything to do with security. And we can talk a little bit about that later on as we go along as well. So with that being said, Joe has, like I said, another tall order to get the university back where it needs to be to increase its security capabilities and its security operations.
Thank you for that great overview, Jeff. I should add, too, we want this to be very interactive, and we've got a lot of questions, but if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to jump in and ask. You don't need to wait to the end necessarily. And so, Joe, turning to you now, what technologies does the University of Central Florida use for your growing security program? And how do you decide on what security solutions to choose?
Okay, thank you. So, as Jeff said, a lot of challenges at UCF, very large school. There are over 200 buildings on the main campus alone, and we're faced with having to manage the camera systems, the access control platforms. We're now looking into license plate recognition systems to try to be a force multiplier for our police department. We partner very strongly with our industry partners such as Pivot3 and OnCam. I can tell you OnCam was a technology that was just introduced to me in the last 6 months. And one of their camera technologies in particular is their 360-degree camera, widely used in New York City. Very impressed with testimonials that I got from the folks that were using it up there. And then the Pivot3 system is going to be instrumental for us in fixing a large problem. So our video management system being Milestone, we had 3 different versions of Milestone software that were being used because it was purchased by end users at a very small level. So I had some that were on the professional level, some that were enterprise, some that were expert, which are 3 of their 4 versions. We made a large capital investment by the university and purchased their professional version, which they call corporate. So the corporate platform allows us to get all of those feeds in from all of those disparate servers into one management environment and be able to better manage the video platform. On the access control side, we use Open Options product, DNA Fusion, for our access control. It started off many years ago. Our IT folks needed to lock down their data IT closets. They researched a platform. At the time, they were a newer company, not as widely known in the access control world, and they invested in it, and it's turned out to be very beneficial for UCF. Milestone and Open Options integrate very well together. So we've been fortunate, and we've actually expanded that program even further. We're almost complete with our source selection on the license plate reader technology. So there are many vendors that are out there, many here represented at the show. So we're looking at what's going to work best for UCF. UCF has its own police force with over 80 sworn and its own 911 dispatch center. So right now for us, Jeff and I are trying to figure out exactly how it's going to integrate with dispatch, whether it's going to be operated by our security team, if we're going to have mobile platforms as well as fixed platforms. And we also have a parking and transportation division that tries to do revenue collection through their patrol cars that they go around looking to issue tickets. So we're integrating that as part of the technology as well. The LPR technology is used by the surrounding municipalities for police, Orlando Police Department, our partners in all the surrounding communities in Orange and Seminole County are two of the largest consumers. They use different products, so we're trying to choose the best one for UCF with that in mind. We have many different camera types on campus. The campus is pretty new. It's 54-year-old campus. They just celebrated their 50th anniversary not too long ago, but they've grown very rapidly. And with that, they haven't really kept security up to date as they've expanded their program, so we're trying to do that. We do use a lot of access cameras. We like the quality of that product, but they don't satisfy every need, which is why we've leveraged on OnCam's 360 solution. We're doing that. But on the technology side, we had 58 different servers spread across many different colleges within UCF that were managing their own video environment. So what we did with that is we had to identify where they all were. There were a lot of standalone DVR systems that were being used. A lot of, I guess you'd call it Home Depot type systems that were purchased by end users using their purchase card and just slapping them up. So with that, there was no policy governance standards to indicate how to protect the surveillance. So we've created all of that now. We're training our users on the proper, on the policies and procedures that have been established. We're trying to determine appropriate use of these technologies, making sure we train individuals on how to use the software that goes along with the hardware that they're using. And we've invested in the licenses and the partnerships with our vendors going forward. So we needed a solution to try to consolidate 58 different servers, some of them over 10 years old, some of them new. None of them maybe purposely built with video storage in mind. So we did a source selection. Pivot3 happened to be the winning solution that we chose. And we purchased a 2.6 petabyte solution, which I didn't know what a petabyte was when I started this, but I do now. The way we kind of calculated our requirements is we said, okay, what are we purchasing now on all of our new construction? And we're doing a lot of new construction on campus. So we said, okay, maybe 5 megapixel camera is the average, recording 60% of the time in a 24-hour day, using compressed video, and what would that calculate to be for our current space of 2,200 cameras with a short-term goal of having 3,000 cameras with the very short the expansive growth that UCF is undergoing right now. So we came up with that figure 2.6. That doesn't satisfy all of our campuses. That takes care of our main campuses and some of our regional campuses that have good bandwidth to communicate back to our main campus environment. And we're also looking at international opportunities that UCF is bidding on right now where we would have standalone needs and we would leverage off that same technology going forward. One of the challenges I face is our IT community very rigorously controls wireless signals. You can imagine with 75,000 people on campus, the amount of wireless signals that are out there and the disruption it can cause, whether it's research, whether it's just operations and use. So they won't allow me to install any access control that's wireless, any cameras that are wireless. So what they gave me as an out is we do work for public safety, so we are leveraging off the public safety frequency, which is a 4.9 gigahertz bandwidth, and we have purchased antenna systems which we can tie to our cameras, at least right for now, that we can stream back over the public safety network. So we're trying to develop an array of antennas on campus that we can set up mobile units that will transmit back to a unit that might be tied into our network that can record back into our VMS. I'm not currently responsible for the alarm space on campus, but there are many alarm facilities. Our police department will not monitor the alarm inputs except with a couple exceptions of our president's residence, which is on campus, and his office space. So all of those alarms go to a third party, several third-party monitoring services that we use today. So we are trying to wrap our arms around that. And I'm sure a lot of you see this as well. Everyone wants a panic button. They think with a student population that could be unpredictable at times, the threats of active shooter. We are a completely open campus. You can drive on campus. You can almost walk into every single building during classroom hours and get into the building. So they want the ability to press a panic button if needed. In some instances, it's very applicable. In others, it's not so. 911 is a much better option, but we're addressing that. And as was introduced, we're responsible for drones. So we thought there was an application, as some of you may have thought, that drones is a good use of security. You can do a lot with them. They're an innovative technology. FAA is ever changing the rules. So we started asking questions and sort of leading the way at UCF on the proper use of drones. If you recall, during this past fall hurricane season, Hurricane Matthew came through Central Florida and up the coast through Georgia and along the coastline and caused a lot of disruption. Jeff and I decided we needed to get a good, accurate description of what damage existed on campus or lack of damage in case the hurricane came through, caused extensive damage, that we'd have something to look back at so we could submit for FEMA reimbursement afterwards. So we hired a professional drone photographer, licensed pilot, and FAA certified to fly drones. And we, in the process, learned a lot about the right way to do that. So we now have, we're developing policy and procedure on that, an approval process, a very high insurance bond that's required for you to be able to fly a drone on campus, and we're trying to lock down that space. The concerns that everyone has on campus is privacy, so you can fly these drones right up to the dorm room windows, them falling out of the sky and injuring someone, but we've found that there's a right way to do that, so we're using what we think are best practices to try to develop that program and do it the right way. So that's a little bit about what technology we're using on campus.
Okay, thank you, Joe. There was a question about challenges. I know you just addressed a bit of that, and I think in the interest of time, we'll move on, and if we do have time to come back to that, we will. Okay. But I'd like to move back to Jeff and talk about some public events. So University of Central Florida hosts several public events, and what are some of the larger or more challenging events that you've hosted, and how have you approached those security-wise?
Okay, sure. So what I'll do is I'll probably give you guys a snapshot of the last 8 months. And it's been very busy, as you can imagine, being in a swing state with election year going on. During that time, we hosted 6 home football games, which is usually attended by about 50,000 people at each one of these games for both the tailgating and actual events itself. We had a Trump campaign come to the campus, and of course we had brought in protesters and also a large crowd of folks that wanted to hear him speak, to the point where we had to close the doors and send a lot of folks home because we just didn't have enough room for that. And then we had to implement some new technology, security technology, to help us kind of watch, especially the protest locations that we had, because normally we didn't have cameras in those areas. And this is where Joe was able to bring in some partners, and we learned about the 4.9 wireless capabilities, and now we have our own capability for that as well. And of course, we had the Obama visit. He came onto our campus on behalf of the Hillary campaign. And if you haven't dealt with a POTUS event before, a President of the United States event before, it's very time consuming. And they usually don't give you much time notice when they come out to visit either. But it pretty much encompasses your entire team and an entire week to be able to prepare for those type of things as well. As most of you may know, in Central Florida, we had the Pulse nightclub terrorist shooting, where our university lost 2 students. One was an alumni and one was an active student at the university. So we hosted multiple vigils at UCF. We also did a benefit concert for a lot of our students. And then we were also one of the main sites for blood donations for Central Florida for that situation. And then among that, we also hosted a Senate debate. And as Joe mentioned, Hurricane Matthew came through. So this all happened in the last 8 months. As you can imagine, when the new year came along, the team was tired. But at the same time, we were able to test and evaluate a lot of our programs and our processes. So when these special events come up, the first thing we do is we bring everybody into our emergency operations center, and we have meetings. And we have a very specific checklist on how we want to manage special events, whether planned or unplanned. And then we run through that process, and we have the executive folks that's involved in it, because it's going to cost funding, and we need their direction on how we want to manage these type of situations. We also bring in our Fusion Center for Intelligence, law enforcement, our Homeland Security folks, hospitals, and other partners throughout the Central Florida area to be able to participate in those discussions. The first meeting we have is talking about the logistics of the actual event itself. And when that meeting is done, we keep all the law enforcement and security folks to stand by afterwards. And when those folks leave, then we go into very great detail on security and emergency management perspectives. And we talk about the what ifs as well. So whether it's going to be weather, if it's going to be an actual attack. And what we do is we put together what we call an incident action plan, an IAP. And this incident action plan has identifies who's responsible for what. So if we have a large event and there's a bombing that happens, or a vehicle decides to try to break through barriers and hurt individuals, we have an IAP in place that we can start implementing protocols as needed. So that's how we kind of learn about events, and that's how we prepare for those.
Thank you, Jeff. Jumbie, I'd like to ask you, how can manufacturers, integrators, and end users like UCF partner together in the education market to meet a school's specific security needs, and how do manufacturers specifically cater to these needs on their end?
Yeah, that's a very big question. But no, schools definitely have, very sometimes unique needs. So the key is really to identify exactly what those are, Schools also have particular environments where privacy, for example, is more important than other environments. I'll give you an example. There was a university close to my house, and one day in one of the departments, someone walked in and basically stole every piece of computing equipment from every room on that floor. Even after that incident happened, and I talked to the head of security, the faculty didn't want any video surveillance on that floor to prevent future incidents. So there is a huge premium on privacy. So they don't want necessarily surveillance equipment that is very obtrusive, that will kind of signal to people that they are on camera all the time, so they generally want more discreet stuff. Once they've kind of figured out what their needs are, then it is really an environment where the integrators and the manufacturers need to work very closely to make sure that the overall system design, one, makes sense in terms of cost, capabilities, etc. But two, very, very importantly, cost is a huge issue. And unlike a lot of other verticals where sometimes there's a lot of leeway in terms of budgets, etc., what we find in most educational environments, especially K through 12, even more than higher ed, is there are very, very fixed budgets. So it's more an exercise of, what security can I get for this amount of money, as opposed to, this is all the security we want and need, how are we going to afford it? So, at OnCam, our equipment lends itself in some ways in that vertical more than others, because you can cover very large areas very cost effectively, and the integration with pretty much all the existing video management systems is complete to the extent that we can pretty much walk into any campus or any K through 12 environment, put these up, integrate them, and have them operational the very next day. And they're very cost effective and very discreet, which is again another, when you put up a very large Pantel zoom camera or a very large security camera that is very obtrusive, people generally tend to object. So 360s, which are very flat, very discreet, and come in very different form factors which conceal them, are generally more acceptable, we find. And same thing with access control systems, intrusion systems, etc. There's a very, very fine line between privacy and access. So this is at a very high level.
Brandon, from your perspective, from this video storage perspective, do you find some of the same requirements in the education market?
Yeah, what's interesting about education, as Jumbi mentioned, is it's a very unique application. It's not like a typical corporate environment or even a government environment where, on one hand, we have perhaps the most valuable assets in the world on our campuses or in our schools that require a high level of security, and we need to protect. The risk is very high, right? We need to protect these assets, absolutely. But in the same time, we're dealing with, we wanted to facilitate an open environment, like Jumbi mentioned. We have data security issues. We have privacy concerns. So it's a very different type of environment than maybe we're typically used to dealing with. But in addition to that, what's unique about the educational institutions is there's typically so many different stakeholders involved, whether it's different departments in a college and university environment, or maybe in a K through 12, you've got different departments within the school system. IT departments are often more and more involved. So you have a lot of different stakeholders that have to be catered to. You have your own responders oftentimes within your organization directly. A lot of different stakeholders that have to be catered to directly. And, again, unique about colleges and universities is that what's happening on campus any day may be very different. Whereas in a corporate environment, typically the operations day to day are pretty similar. Not a lot changes from one day to another. So from a infrastructure standpoint, when we think about planning out our security technology, we think about planning out how are we going to take into account all these different needs of all these different stakeholders, but still provide the level of security that we need, get the information to the people that need it when they need it as quickly as possible. We need to think all the way back to the infrastructure level. So how do we manage all of these different disparate systems? You know, oftentimes I think, Joe, you mentioned before, you had maybe 50 different types of systems that were in place across the campus. And that's a pretty typical situation, both in colleges, universities, as well as in K through 12 environments where we've got multiple different types of surveillance systems, multiple different access control, intrusion detection, visitor management, all of these different systems that have been deployed typically by different people under different budgets, not often following any type of standard, and really causing more problems than they're actually solving in many cases. So we need to think about how do we effectively consolidate those technologies together, put them to use in a way that makes the most sense, that makes them the most effective for the users, right? So we're not just managing all these different disparate systems out there, but we do so in a way that meets our budgetary constraints, that now more and more meets the requirements of our IT departments, because we're seeing IT departments getting more and more involved, again, particularly in the infrastructure and the servers, the storage, the networking, and those aspects of it, and provide technologies that not only solve their problems, but also make their systems the most effective, the most efficient, that protect their data, prevent them from going down, prevent any kind of downtime, prevent any kind of data loss, and gives them the scalability that's required to meet their budgetary requirements and the changing needs of their campuses and their environments over time. Because one of the things, particularly in video surveillance, with all the new technology that companies like OnCam are bringing out, video surveillance systems, maybe more than any other technology in security now, change constantly. They're constantly changing. And what's state of the art this year, 18 months from now, may be considered old school technology. So we have to be able to change and adapt with the times. And that's what we do at Pivot 3, is we develop infrastructure that, number one, complies with what our IT departments expect to see, which is a very manageable infrastructure that eliminates things like downtime and data loss, and that also maximizes our scalability. So it gives us the ability to grow over time in a way that's very cost-effective, cost-efficient, and non-disruptive to their existing applications, because these are mission critical. These are mission critical applications in colleges, universities, and K through 12 environments, and we have to ensure the integrity of those systems really beyond anything else.
It's a good term to apply to it, mission critical, like that. And so, Paul, building on what Jumbi and Brandon related to our audience, as a consultant, your business touches all of these people, the end user, the integrator, the manufacturer. Give us your perspective on, how do you make sure that you're giving the school end user the right thing that's going to help them in cases, in all of these different scenarios, security scenarios.
Right, thank you, I appreciate that. Well, first of all, the thing I want to say is anytime we're at a session like this, a panel session, we want to look for ways to make application. And one of the ways that I've already decided to make application is I will make the commitment to not fly a drone at UCF. I'm definitely not going to do that. I want to say, and it was said over here just recently, there are many stakeholders that are involved, right, in a school situation and in a place that we want it to be open and friendly and welcoming and all the other words that could be associated with that. But where we're often missing the boat is in education. And I talk with, whether it's higher ed or K through 12, I talk with staff, faculty all the time, and I say, tell me, how many cameras do you have on campus or in your building or whatever it might be? People have no idea. They don't know where the cameras are. They don't know, and that can affect where we're walking, if we're walking by ourselves, or where we're parking, or any of those things. And whatever we're doing has to be a collaborative effort. There's no doubt about it. And there has to be education that follows up with that. Even in this room, and please don't look around right now, but how many of you even know if there is an evacuation map in this room? And yet it's critical for our life, health, safety, is it not? But we walk around in Mayberry for too long, and pretty soon everything becomes scenery. What can we do to make sure that we have a safe learning environment? And let me go one step further, that people have actually made an investment in that environment, because if they haven't, we're fighting against the very people we're trying to protect. And I know we want convenience, but not at the price of having a safe learning environment. And so I'm constantly saying, what can we do, whether positive incentives or reinforcement, or when I come up to the person and I say, what a great camera system, can you show me that parking lot last night at midnight? And they go, no, I'd have to get the so-and-so to do that. I'd have to get, no, you're sitting behind a gargantuanly expensive and could be effective system, but if we're not utilizing it properly, we have low value. I just really, and I know I'll be quick here, but I did a tabletop exercise with a chancellor's cabinet in a University of Wisconsin system school. I don't want to mention which one. And it was like a revelation for them to think about a scenario. And we're around a table where I'm trying to keep them relaxed. You could see blood pressure was rising because here, let me just, and this is where I'll end it. There is a tension that exists between people who are losing sleep at night in fear of these things happening, and then them actually being able to utilize anything that's at their disposal. And I'll ask all the time, I'll ask a room of superintendents, how many of you have the capability of pulling up an app that you can look at your own cameras? And generally now, as days pass by, maybe half the hands will come up, and then and proudly, right? Because the IT person did that for them. And then I'll say, now, at the break, who's willing to show some others that didn't raise their hands on your own phone some of the cameras we can look at? No hands go up. Everyone has it, but no one's using it. What can we do to get people to make an investment? It's got to be a collaborative strategy.
Thank you, Paul. How are we on time? We're
I
good.
feel good. I'm kidding around.
Do we need to wrap up right at 12:30? No. Okay. Yes, a question from the back. Yeah.
You're welcome, and I want to just dovetail on that really quick and say this. You know, the first law of loss prevention says effective loss prevention, which is what we all want, is always preceded by extensive losses, which means we didn't do anything until we felt terrible pain or terrible loss. And you know, it's just so interesting to me that we're in that kind of a situation, but at the same time, security is being elevated. Society is demanding that we have better security. They just don't want it to stomp on their but even in this room, and we've introduced everybody, but I don't know if it was mentioned, but the gentleman here from the University of Central Florida was a finalist in the Campus Safety Magazine Security Director of the Year process. That's impressive. That ought to be celebrated on a campus. For too long, especially young people have gone, oh, that's a campus security person. What? No. No, that's somebody who's protecting all of us. And I believe that all is being elevated and raised. Education is the way to do that, and of course, achievement as well. But I just want to say that and recognize, because it is so important.
Congratulations on that.
Add to that as well. Yeah, I think to add to that a little bit as well, in addition to the education, the policies, the procedures, everything that we have, it's how do we leverage our technology to help in those situations. So we all know the risk or the potential threat of some incident occurring. And then sometimes we get maybe a little bit too comfortable in thinking, well, we've got cameras all over the place. We have cameras all over the school, so we're safe, right? And Joe mentioned it earlier. It took them 4 hours to access video in an active shooter situation. Anyone in security knows that is about 3 hours and 59 minutes too long. Right? That is way, way too long. So think about, as we're deploying all this latest and greatest technology, how do we do so in a way that makes it effective and actually makes it usable? How do we get that information into the hands of the people that need to use it so that they can respond to an incident and mitigate that incident, hopefully reduce the impact of that incident, or maybe even prevent it, depending on the situation. But think about that with your technology. Just putting cameras up isn't necessarily enough.
Yes. Or stand. Thank you.
You've mentioned about there have just been a ton of cameras being installed on campus, your campus, and that's a nationwide thing. And also access control points, mass notification, fire, intrusion, yada, yada, yada. How are you guys managing the maintenance of all this? Because we've done studies on this, and I think that there are a lot of campuses that don't know what they don't know about, because they've got all this stuff installed everywhere, but they don't know how to manage the maintenance, and they don't know the maintenance issues that they have.
Jeff?
Sure. So for mass communications, that's one of the primary reasons why we hired a warning communications coordinator. So not only does he manage and test our mass notification system, we also send him to the schools. So the systems that we utilize, we send them to the same schools that their technicians go to, so he can speak the same language and understand how it's going to work. This way he's ordering the right parts, he's working very closely with our vendors and making sure that process is very efficient. And the university gives him a pretty nice budget to make sure that system is always up and operational. And that was also, when I mentioned earlier about the expansion of Joe's office with his 2 coordinators, with probably hiring additional specialists, that's one of the challenges that we're facing right now is how do we maintain that? One of the things that Joe and I have been doing, and it's something that we've been working on for the last 6 months, is securing funding to be able to replace the old cameras with new, and then also increasing the maintenance and the technology aspect. So Joe's been working very hard on creating a model on how that's going to work. So when we have new construction that comes on board, we expand our Pivot 3 server farm. We put additional cameras in place. That now comes out of those construction projects as a funding aspect of it goes. We own those licenses, and then we work on the maintenance aspects of it too. Because in the past, what had happened was these different departments were responsible for these cameras and access control systems, and they didn't maintain and they didn't keep up with them. And we've just received access to some cameras in one of our buildings that we have DoD partnerships in, Department of Defense folks working out of, and we're learning that those cameras have been out for years. And so now that we're getting access to that, we have a dedicated security manager that has a staff that can monitor and track the status of all those type of projects and then put it into work orders. So one department to go to, one location to be able to manage the funding aspect of it, and also the maintenance aspect of it, makes it a lot more efficient than in the past where you're asking someone else to be responsible for that, and then when that person leaves, no one touches that program again. So that's what we've done at the University of Central Florida as well. And one of the things I wanted to mention that these 2 individuals talked a little bit about was Joe and I just recently, in the last 6 months, as everyone knows here, security enhancements, security systems, emergency management type of systems are very expensive. So we're very lucky. Our boss, the chief of police, and the vice president we report to is the CFO. And one of the things that we do is we're always asking for money, and the CFO doesn't see his investment, right? So what we do now is every quarter we bring our CFO and then our budget analyst in with our chief of police, and we give them a demo of everything that we're using. We showed them last week, 2 weeks ago, the on-cam camera, on how we're utilizing that in some of our new restaurants we have at the university. And he sees that, and then Joe's briefing him. Normally we would have 4 cameras in this location. This is now 1 license, 1 camera, and we can do this. And our chief sees that, and now they see the investment. And now we're getting questions from our senior administration. How do I get access control on my suite? How do I get that camera in our locations? And we're getting a buy-in from the rest of the university to see that technology, because our aspect was ask for the money, and they don't get to see it, and they don't see what their investment is. And now that they get to see that, okay, we want to see this at other locations as well. And then when they go to places and they get complaints from deans and directors, they can say, reach out to Joe and his team, and they'll be able to provide you guys with a resource, because I've seen what they can do.
Nice.
If I could add to that too. So I mentioned Hurricane Matthew. During Hurricane Matthew, we got the fortune of spending 36 straight hours together in our emergency operations center with all of our closest friends, with no shower, no food, no anything else. But the nice part about that is our provost, we have a president and a provost. Our provost spent that time with us. We used that captive audience as a great opportunity to show him firsthand, which buildings were getting accessed when the hurricane was going on and we were in a lockdown mode, so we could respond to those, get our police officers out there, make sure that the buildings were secure and our students and faculty were safe. During the campaign visits that Jeff mentioned, the president of our university, they try to stay agnostic as far as their party affiliations go, so they come to the EOC and monitor the entire operation during that event. So my team got firsthand opportunity to talk to the president of the university, which is a rare opportunity for us. and hands-on demonstrate all the things. And Robin, to your question earlier, other things we do is we're looking at our cameras every single day, making sure they're not down. We set up analytics so the health monitoring activates and tells if a camera is down. We look at our panels and our access control every single day to make sure that the card readers are up and running. And we're trying to use our budget for maintenance more wisely. So we look inward, we see if there's a network failure instead of calling out our vendor for a troubleshooting of our camera or a card reader, because oftentimes if you have a building that goes down, it's probably a network failure. And what we see a lot in Central Florida is a lot of lightning. We're the lightning capital of North America in Orlando, so we lose a lot of hardware due to lightning strikes. So what we do now is we try to protect and isolate all of our exterior devices for lightning protection. We make sure that our switches, which they're all IP network devices, aren't vulnerable to those lightning strikes, and we try to minimize the loss. And then where we do have loss, we put in insurance claims so we're not spending maintenance money for what something might be already insured.
Thank you. I'd like to switch topics a little bit here and ask, oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
Central Florida.
They're the other guys.
No need to, yes, UCF, thank you. Sorry about that. You guys have a pretty large system in place, 2,200 cameras, going to grow to 3,000. That's a significant impact on your network demand. Now, a lot of us are familiar with working with IT and security, still separate from one another, but closely working together. With an organization of your side, do you guys have dedicated IT resource on the security side that manages all of your specific security network devices, or do you still have collaboration between the two?
That's a very good question. So one of the things Jeff did for my interview panel is he brought the director of IT over to make sure that they were hiring someone that had a deep appreciation for the value of IT in a security organization. So they were partners early on. Our organization has taken all the disparate IT professionals across the university, they brought them under one umbrella, and now they work as one solid group. We partner with them, we bunch test every new product we introduce, whether it's a new model camera, a new access control card reader. We put it on their bench, they test it, they make sure it's not going to bring the network down. We measure the bandwidth and the consumption, making sure we're compressing video where we can, and it's a hand-in-hand partnership. We've asked for a dedicated IT resource just for our facility because we have a lot of technology, and to support our new server farm for Pivot 3 and our access control servers. But we absolutely couldn't do it without IT, and it is a true partnership at UCF.
Thanks. Okay, back to just switch topics. I'd like to ask a few specific questions before we come out to a more broader scope and wrap up. And specifically about panoramic cameras. I know there's great interest in that. So Jumbi, if you could tell us about what are the advantages that panoramic cameras provide, and how are they most useful in the education scenario?
Sure. Actually, I guess the two biggest advantages are cost and coverage. So they're generally more cost effective because they give you as much coverage as you would get from 4 to 5 narrow field of view cameras. So bang for the buck, obviously in campus environments where again, budgets are limited, that brings a lot to the table. The other one is, the form factors are generally much, much more acceptable on campuses, as I mentioned before. So in a lot of internal environments, recessed cameras that essentially, flat to the ceiling, they don't look obtrusive, are much more acceptable. On the outdoors, again, the amount of coverage you get from a 360 panoramic camera is really unparalleled. And, one of the things, and I'll give you a little bit of an advertising pitch here for OnCam, but one of the things that OnCam does is it basically just gives you a 360 image. So it's one stream of video that goes across the network and it's stored, and then you can go around and move around in the video as if you would in a PTZ camera, both in live mode as well as in the stored video. So unlike other cameras where you might need to stream 4 or 5 streams of video that are sections of the 360, in OnCam, you only stream one 360 view, and then you can go after the fact and do your investigation in any part of the view, same like you would in the live video. So, that's what our users generally like the most in terms of the capability.
Thank you. And for Brandon, how long do schools retain video data? How long and why is that number arrived at?
Yeah, from our experience, what we've seen is typically, particularly for K through 12, and even in colleges, universities, typically been about 30 days. And I would say that's generally been limited primarily by budget, by how much money they had available to implement different storage solutions. What we're starting to see, though, is that particularly in K through 12, is that retention requirement going up to as much as a year, really, or at least to encompass the entire school year, because incidents and events can occur at various times throughout the year, and oftentimes those incidents don't always come to the forefront immediately. So we're looking at ways to how do we scale our storage up in a cost-effective way. And to add a little bit on what Joe said before, here's a statistic that I think is incredible. I just heard recently, video surveillance systems in 2017 will generate over 15 zettabytes of new data. Now, you guys said you didn't know what a petabyte was. Well, a zettabyte is a whole bunch of petabytes, right? But to put that in context, most people can't really think about that. To put that in context, that's twice as much data as being generated by the next biggest big data application out there, which is somewhere around 7 zettabytes of new data. And on top of that, video is growing, that data generation is growing at about 40 to 50% per year. Now, some of that's being driven by retention time, some of that's being driven by more cameras being put out, by new types of camera technologies, lots of different reasons for that. But we have to think about now, we want to store that video for a long time. We're generating more and more data than ever before. That data is more important to us than ever before. How do we scale our systems, and how do we protect that data? How do we ensure that that data is always protected, always available, always accessible when we need it the most? So that scalability is a big, big challenge.
Thank you. Another question for you, Brandon. There are a number of video storage systems that customers rely on. What are the differences between them?
Well, the two primary architectures out there, one that most people are familiar with, NVRs or DVRs, just servers with video management software installed. It's an architecture most people are familiar with. They work pretty well for small systems, but as we scale those systems up and make them larger and larger, NVRs can be a real challenge. It can be a real challenge from a management standpoint. If we have 2.5 petabytes worth of NVRs we have to put out there, we got to fill up a room with a whole bunch of boxes. So it'll be a real challenge from a management standpoint, can introduce lots of single points of failure, and really introduce potentially even more risk into our systems. On the other end of the spectrum is the enterprise class IT storage, like SANs and NAS type solutions, which solves some of the problems of NVRs, but at the same time, they were not built for a video surveillance type of application. So they don't work very well for video, and they can be extremely expensive and very complex and proprietary to manage. So what we do at Pivot3 is we sort of sit in between, in the middle. We use the same type of hardware that the NVRs use, but we deliver the same kind of functionality and value that an enterprise class SAN solution would provide, but without the cost and complexity typically associated with that.
Okay, thank you. And I just would like to wrap up with a question. We'll start with you, Paul, but I would like to hear from everyone. What are 3 things that schools can do to provide a safer learning environment? And if you would kind of focus on the technology, if you could, because we are a technology-centric panel, but it doesn't have to stay there. So 3 things that schools can do to provide a safer learning environment. Paul,
Okay,
take it away.
the first thing I think is raise awareness, I think, and I mentioned that earlier. The more information that people have that is practical information and that they can take hold of, the better. It's just like the zone officer gets changed out a lot because otherwise everything starts looking the same. And so let's get a way to raise awareness, giving briefings, making a security component part of faculty meetings, departmental meetings, et cetera, is so important. I think the second thing I would say is involving students. Now, I don't involve students K through 5th grade, and I'm starting to waffle on 5th grade a little bit, but 6th grade and above, I involve students because they're ahead of us in technology, and they've got a much better pulse for what's really going on. What are healthy and appropriate ways to bring students in? Right after this panel, I'm going to Snapchat with my daughter, just so everybody knows. But whether we get dragged there kicking or screaming or not, Youth and early adopters are leading the way for all of these things. We must do that. So I'm gonna hold it to just two because I know we have other people here, but those are the two that I would talk about.
So I'll give you two as well. To piggyback on what Paul said, listening to the students, our president and provost offer an open forum for anyone to come up and take the mic and ask a question. And a lot of those are very challenging, and a lot of those are targeted usually after an incident happens at security. So one such incident that I've lived over and over and over again has to do with cameras in garages. It might sound like a simple thing, but we have 10 three-story or four-story garages on campus, and none of them have security cameras in them really to speak of. So this one student had his car broken into. He lived on campus. His car broken into in September. It got stripped out, brought to the roof, and abandoned there. He didn't notice it for 3 months until he went back to his car for the first time. So he said, why aren't there cameras? What can I do about it? So he spoke to his student government. He spoke to his faculty, his dean, his advisor. Then he went to the president's open forum. Then he wrote his congressman. His congressman wrote us a nice letter saying, why don't you have security at UCF? So we responded to that in a very proactive manner. We invited the student to our VP's office, and we had an open dialogue about all the things UCF is doing. He was unaware of all of those things through increased hiring at our police department, increased hiring at our security department, the formation of a security office, standards being written to try to broadly address security issues on campus. And he was very pleased with that. And also, we now have a new standard for garages to at least cover all the entrances and exits of every garage and more where we need to. The second one I'll talk to is basically being able to lock down a building. Active shooter is one of our biggest concerns that we have right now, and being able to keep that large of a population safe if something bad happens. And in inclement weather, which University of Central Florida has, being able to have people seek safe shelter in a building if a tornado or a hurricane is going through and we need to open those doors. So we only have 1,200 of our 13,000 doors on main campus protected by access control. We walked every building. We identified where every card reader was, which system it was on, and through a risk-based approach, we're now deciding on a plan to fix access control in all of those buildings where none exists. So if you looked at a map of UCF and green is good, I have 5 buildings that are green. All the rest are yellow or red. So we're chipping away at that based on priorities and risk to the building, the criticality of the building, the size of the student population could be the main criticality of the building. It might not be stuff we're protecting, it's students we're protecting. So leveraging our access control and putting cameras on critical facilities first in a logical order and getting the biggest bang for our buck is how we're trying to protect our campus.
Excuse me, Jenna, do we have time for any more responses? Okay. Okay.
Sure, I'll keep mine short. So I think one is going to be partnerships. So not just with the university, but also our local responders. One of the things that we do, for instance, Joe just recently was able to work the NFL Pro Bowl and provide security for that with our local our Orlando Police Department, and also the Daytona 500. So building those partnerships with those different folks. And then for me, what that really builds for us is a common operational picture. So we want to be able to, when these first responders show up to our university, I want to be able to push those video feeds to those folks that need to have it so they can make critical incident decisions. So partnerships, and as well as a common operational picture for us.
Thank you.
I'll keep mine real short as well, but just 2 things really. One is think about infrastructure, right? As you're deploying all this technology, you're deploying all these great new cameras, all this different functionality, don't wait till the last minute to think about the infrastructure. Not just the network, but your servers, your storage, and everything that goes along with it. If you wait till the last minute and you just go to your IT department or you go to your IT reseller and then buy something, you're going to introduce technology that could even put the user at a higher level of risk without unintentionally. So think about infrastructure early on, and then as they said, is get all of the stakeholders involved early on, not just the users, but the people that control the budgets, as well as the IT department. So if you're talking about this much technology, this much data, it's so critical to have the IT departments involved, not just for their buy-in, but actually have them actively involved early on.
Thank you.
Actually,
Genevieve,
Mike,
over
even
Paul.
quicker. Just, my top 2 would be accessibility to the information. So you want to make sure you have all this great information, video, access control, intrusion, etc. You want to try and pull it all together and into a sensible system. And there are software packages available. For example, I think there's one in the room here called Pinpoint, which pulls all the different feeds together and makes sure the right information gets to the right person at the right time. So the second part of that is to make sure that these systems are extremely well integrated so that the right information can be gleaned and sent to the right person at the right time.
Thank you very much. So thank you for joining us. Feel free to stick around for a few minutes if you'd like and ask additional questions to the panelists. And please join me in thanking the panelists today. Very interesting.